Woe to those who lead idle lives. Idleness is a dreadful illness and must be cured in childhood. If it is not cured then, it can never be cured. Hello again, and welcome back to the series. I'm your host, and today we're looking at Pinocchio, 1940. This script was written by David, so thank you, David. If you're new here, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many, and if you're returning, I thank you again for your continued patronage. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. Disney's second ever production, Pinocchio is based on the 1881 story The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, which was originally published serially in a magazine, and then in its final form as a children's novel, similar to the original 1919 Curse of Capistrano titled publication of Johnston McCulley's pulp classic The Mark of Zorro. After having tackled a young girl in his debut feature, for his second film, Walt decided to tell the story of a little boy. Another one of the stories he considered to be their first production before settling on Snow White, Walt shelved Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, two other still considered projects that are alluded to in the storybook opening, for a few years, to instead focus on the little puppet boy from Italy. This is the first animated action-adventure film. The production of Snow White had lasted 3 years, and while Disney and his team were enormously proud of everything they'd accomplished with it, they themselves had learned so much about the animation process during filming that they found themselves slightly embarrassed by some of the earliest work that they'd still included in that first film. With Pinocchio, Disney and his staff decided to fully test themselves, inserting sequences, such as the Monstro escape scene, that they wouldn't have dreamed of attempting in Snow White just 3 years earlier. Thus began what became known as Walt's pursuit of perfection in Pinocchio. He and his team were determined to make this one bigger, bolder, grander, more spectacular, more intense, more bursting with life in every single frame. Indeed, this movie is so stuffed full of different stuff that after the first quite slow half hour, there's barely any room to breathe in between events and life lessons before the movie is over. This film is in the handful of features that is most often considered, at least by many critics, to be either the best film in the entire canon or at least a contender for that title. I do not agree with that. Over and over as I look through other rankings of the canon, Pinocchio is up there with the likes of The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, Fantasia, Aladdin, and Snow White, as the few films so universally praised that they are routinely found in the number 1 or 2 positions on people's ranking lists of Disney. While I do find this curious, since I do have some pretty big problems with this film as you'll see, I do understand why it's so revered, if perhaps a little overly idealized in retrospect. Pinocchio was not a financial success upon release. On a reported budget of $2.6 million, far more than what Snow White had cost, this film made between $1.4 and $1.9 million back in its initial run, a significant loss for the fledgling Disney Animation Company and their distributor, and a big disappointment at the time after the record-breaking box office returns of the 3 years previous smash hit Snow White. This was the beginning of the trend that would become Walt Disney making money so he could make more animated movies, rather than making animated movies so he could make more money. While Walt did see some hits during his lifetime, the Disney Animation Studio was not nearly the box office golden ticket under Mr. Disney that it would become in the eras following his death. This film became the first of many that he would release to be classified as a financial flop. Having a party tonight? This is the first in what I like to refer to as Disney's princess films for boys subgenre, or Little Prince films for short. Basically, the exact same type of coming-of-age stories as their princess films are, except aimed at and about boys, and less, but still sometimes, focused on a royal main character. This film opens with perhaps the most important narrator in Disney history, and their first great solo sidekick, freaking JC. Jiminy Cricket, not Jesus Christ. Geppetto refers to Cleo the fish as his Little Mermaid, which is exactly the sort of stupid, unintentional Disney Universe Easter egg that I adore, and that continues to fuel my own princess verse theory. The concept of the wishing star in Disney begins here, in Pinocchio, with Geppetto. In a perfectly executed sequence of music and animation together, one of the most powerful forces of magic in the entire Disney animated canon and princess verse, the wishing star, was introduced to audiences in this film. More on that later in her dedicated section. I love Pinocchio and Geppetto's conversation at the end of the first night, as they're both falling asleep. Geppetto explaining why we need to sleep, and that Pinocchio has to go to school in the morning because he has to get smart. Because. Pinocchio asks question after question after question, and then Geppetto just says, because. And then he's just like, oh, adorable! I basically love the first third of this film, with Jiminy Cricket leading us into Geppetto's evening, his wish, the blue fairy, and Pinocchio's first night of consciousness. Pinocchio and Geppetto's bond is one of the sweetest parent-child relationships in any Disney film, and it is the undoubted emotional core of this story, explored beautifully in the first half hour. This is one of the only films in the canon that features both human characters in a realistic world, just featuring magic, that also features completely anthropomorphic, fully functioning in society, animal-human hybrid characters in Honest John and Gideon, a foxman and a catman. This makes Pinocchio somewhat of a bridge film between something like Snow White or Tangled, princess films, and something like Zootopia or Robin Hood, which are animals in place of humans but in a human-like world films. Pleasure Island, baby! Alright, I'm just gonna say it. Pleasure Island looks fun as fuck. Just saying. Pleasure Island looks fun as fuck. And that's my dankula moment. Pinocchio's reunion with his father is such a sweet and lovely moment. Geppetto instantly forgiving his son for anything he may have done wrong to earn his ass's ears and tail, knowing that the only thing that matters is that they're together again. Incredible character design here. Pinocchio is one of Disney Animation's most memorable and relatable protagonists. A naive little goofball who aggressively fails upwards at an impressive yet slightly alarming rate. I'm not saying he isn't good-hearted by the end, but boy howdy is Pinocchio ever just saved over and over by the other characters around him, mainly Jiminy Cricket, before finally returning that favor and saving Geppetto's life at the 11th hour, at last making good on his enormous potential to be a decent and honest person. Dick Jones, born in 1927, provided the voice for the main character. He was a fairly prolific child actor of the day, also appearing in live action alongside major stars of the time, such as James Stewart. He did an excellent job of Pinocchio, going a long way toward making his naivete charming, and his chemistry with the other voice actors, especially those for Jiminy and Geppetto, is excellent all throughout. Pinocchio, if you can believe it, is actually quite a bit less of a little shit in this than he is in the original Collodi tale. The best example of this is what happens to the character that inspired Jiminy Cricket. In the original tale, Pinocchio is confronted by a talking cricket partway through the stories, who warns him, much like Jiminy Cricket eventually does in the movie, about the dangers of disobedience and laziness. Book Pinocchio's response to this is to hurl a hammer at the unfortunate and correct cricket, instantly killing it. Disney made the smart story decision to flesh him out into a full sidekick, and in the process created one of Disney's most enduring mascots. I'm gonna go into Larry King mode when I'm at the desk. It's sort of fun to get into that voice, you know. Listen, McDonald, you think that's funny? It's fun to get into Larry mode, Larry King. It's fun to be the king. It's a good time.
Maybe I'll just do the rest of the review as Larry. I'll just do the rest of it as Larry. Jiminy warming his butt by the fire and having to catch himself before he says the word ass is probably the first dirty joke in Disney animation history. Oh, Lordy. Or save the starving pygmies down in Africa. Lord, I apologize. Time to get serious. Get her done.
Jiminy warming his butt by the fire and having to catch himself before he says the word ass is probably the first dirty joke in Disney animation history. Jiminy Cricket is just such a solid, good little dude. He's the best friend everyone needs, the perfect wingman, and outside of the genie, one of the coolest sidekicks they've ever written. The voice performance is the definition of charming and sincere, and I love both his hobo outfit at the beginning and his magically spiffed up gear as well. Like, damn, what a solid bro for going back to say goodbye to Pinocchio, then helping him out when imprisoned by the evil gypsy stereotype. Jiminy is absolutely the only reason that Pinocchio is still around at the end of the film at all to redeem himself. The voice was provided by Cliff Edwards, otherwise known as Ukulele Ike. An already established screen and stage performer, Edwards was the first ever example of celebrity voice casting. One of his biggest claims to fame was being the original recording artist of the hit song Singin' in the Rain in 1929. His performance here as Jiminy is legendary, and rightfully so. So warm and kind and friendly and wholesome. One of early Disney's greatest creations. This movie is chock full of memorable supporting players, due in large part to the episodic nature of the story, allowing them to focus on different supporting characters in each separate segment. This movie has cultural stereotypes up the wazoo, and unlike a few other films like Lady and the Tramp, for example, I don't think that Pinocchio justifies the use of its stereotypes at all by making them anywhere near as charming as something like that former film. Lady and the Tramp may go a bit too far at certain points, but most of its simplified, heavily stereotyped characters feel lovingly crafted, like adorable and well-meaning caricatures. For the most part. For the most part. Anyway, for the most part, Pinocchio stereotypes just end up feeling gross, weird, and mean-spirited rather than at all playful, and basically just racist. Especially Stromboli, the walking, talking, wiggling, jiggling, horrendously blatant gypsy stereotype that, even in the late 1990s, Disney had still not fully shaken the specter of in their animation division. But more on that another day, far in the future. The Blue Fairy was Disney Animation's first fairy, the precursor to those later found in Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and several other stories. She is also one of the most powerful magical beings that Disney has ever created. Her ability to grant life and sentience to Pinocchio very similar to the magic that Elsa, without meaning to, works to bring Olaf the Snowman to life in the first Frozen film. The Blue Fairy is the only character in the film that is animated via rotoscoping, a process wherein the animators would trace directly over film of a live-action actor performing the scene, usually the voice actor. This was also employed in much of Snow White, outside of the more cartoonishly drawn dwarves. Seeing how magically powerful the Blue Fairy is, and how she is the only rotoscoped character, I feel as though this can be read as a metaphor for the animators themselves. Here they are, stepping into the story in the form of the most realistically drawn character, and giving her the voice and visage of an enchanting woman. The Blue Fairy is a metaphor for the concept of the magic of Disney itself stepping in and creating the story in front of our eyes, based on one of the most powerful forces in the Disney universe, a sentient wishing star. In a film as obsessed with visuals as this one is, see Pinocchio's nose being a visual representation of his dishonesty, and the boys turn to donkeys showing their descent into alcoholic, smoke-riddled debauchery, something that Walt Disney would never partake in, no sirree Bob. Nor I. I can't help but think that the Blue Fairy could be another entirely intentional visual storytelling device. The Blue Fairy is on the level of the genie from Aladdin after he is freed in terms of magical power, ability, and omniscience, and may in fact outclass him. This is shown no better than when she brings Pinocchio fully to life as a human at the end of the film, true humanity being something that even Olaf is never granted. The Blue Fairy is essential true humanity. It sounds so like snowman racist, but it's true. He's a snowman. He cannot exist as we do, flesh and blood. The Blue Fairy is essentially a benevolent angel or god in the Disney princess verse. This is also illustrated in how Jiminy Cricket is one of the handful of recurring mascot characters in Disney animation canon lore that can often appear in Disney projects regardless of era or setting. These characters, like Jiminy, Mickey Mouse, Donald, Goofy, Tinkerbell the Genie, the princesses to a certain degree, and several others, are themselves all somewhat supernatural beings, because of this very power they all share, and that being said, the Blue Fairy essentially grants Jiminy Cricket this power on screen in front of our very eyes. Further evidence that Jiminy is actually magical after the Blue Fairy enchants him is that, at the end of the film, he has zero trouble breathing underwater when looking for Geppetto. Pinocchio obviously has no trouble breathing underwater because he is made of wood at that point, but, fucking Jiminy just goes underwater and breathes, and anyway, he's magic, and she made him magic, and he's telling the story in retrospect because he's magic. Jiminy's magic. Hashtag. Okay. Her design is utterly gorgeous, ethereal, enchanting, and affecting everything around her in a warm, welcoming, and pleasantly effortless bliss. Everything is suddenly alright every time the fairy shows up, just because she desires it to be so. What a nice lady. There is also a fan theory that the star from The Princess and the Frog that Ray the Firefly is so in love with is in fact the Blue Fairy herself, and that the Blue Fairy's true name is Evangeline, known only to Ray as he is her true love. I really enjoy this theory, personally believe it, and can just totally see this being true, as that later wishing star granted Tiana's wish just the same as this one did Geppetto's. Beginning with the Blue Fairy, early Disney animation often used strings to signify magic in their film universe, especially with ethereal-sounding instruments like the celesta and the new, at the time, novacord. Geppetto was voiced by Christian Rubb, who, as I am sure you're all seeing on screen right now, looked exactly like Geppetto. He was the direct physical inspiration for him, as was often the case with early Disney voice actors. He provides the perfect, warm, tired old counterpart to Pinocchio's youthful and uncontained zeal. I must for a moment talk about Erik Larsen's work animating Figaro. Erik Larsen was the animation supervisor on the cat character and was able to imbue the little fellow with an enormous amount of character and expression. Parts of Figaro's animation and characterization have been called by some the pinnacle of Larsen's professional work as an animator, and I can see why. Also, I didn't put any notes in here about Cleo, but I love Cleo the fish, and she is one of my favorite characters. I think she's lovely and wonderfully designed and so charming, and I just think she's so cute. I love Cleo. I love her. There are so many Galdern antagonists in this film. From Honest John and Gideon to Stromboli to the Coachman to Monstro, my lord, it has to be a Disney record. Let us explore them one by order of chronology. Honest John and his many deceptions are fascinating, a character that uses his natural fox slyness for evil rather than good. This is in direct contrast to Robin Hood, 1973, and finally in Zootopia, the sinister, exploitative fox and the sly, heart of gold and force for good fox archetypes were married into one final third character in this trio, the recent and excellent Nick Wilde, portrayed by Jason Bateman in the Zootopia films. Films plural, perhaps, I hope. Gideon's hiccups were provided by the greatest voice actor of all time, Bugs Bunny himself, Mel Blanc. This is Blanc's first of only 2 blink and you'll miss it contributions to Disney animation, the second coming in Sleeping Beauty 19 years later, as the horsey sounds of Samson the Horse. Blanc apparently recorded an entire vocal performance for Gideon the Catman before, in an extremely typical Walt Disney move, Walt then decided to make the character a mute instead, scrapping the entire performance except for a few hiccups. Stromboli is a horrendously offensive caricature of a Romani, or often commonly referred to as gypsy, person. While not quite the most racially insensitive element of the film, he is by far the most culturally bigoted and mean-spirited, and his entire character is just an excuse to take a cheap and lazy potshot at the Romani peoples. This was bullshit at the time that it was made, and it is bullshit now. So I must rightfully condemn it as such. The Coachman is fucking terrifying. Holy crap. The moment this disgusting child trafficking motherfucker said they never come back as boys, with his lurid tomato-red, dog-ass, sweaty face jump-scaring into frame, I just about shit my pants. This is truly the large Marge of the 1940s. And this guy takes the cake as not only the most disturbing antagonist of this film, but as one of the most morally repugnant villains in all of Disney history. I must also make a special note of the fact that the only part I truly enjoyed in the recent and disastrously awful live-action remake of Pinocchio was Luke Evans' performance as the Coachman, complete with a somehow excellent new song. The man simply does not miss. I adore what an expressive design and face Monstro has. Monstro is truly one of the most terrifying physical threats in the Disney canon, and would even give 1997 Hercules probably at least a difficult few minutes. Seriously, this whale is some kaiju-ass dune sandworm level nightmare fuel. My favorite of the villains in the movie, even if he does feel super tacked on just to have a threat at the end from a story perspective. This is, in many ways, Disney's most specific coming-of-age story, and one of their most famous and referenced films in general, due in no small part to how famous and enduring the story of Pinocchio itself has been since it was first published. In this film, there are 3 distinct acts, each act featuring a pivotal scene involving the Blue Fairy intervening with her all-powerful magic. Act 1, the first half hour, is Geppetto's wish being made and granted, with Pinocchio's coming to life, and contains the first intervention of the Blue Fairy, that being to allow Pinocchio the chance to earn his humanity through his heroic and morally righteous choices. Much like Hercules, attempting to achieve godhood, or Lewis from Meet the Robinsons attempting to find the path to becoming the true future Tom Selleck version of himself. Ooh, I must have been writing these 2 around the same time. I bet you anything. Act 2, the longest at just under 40 minutes, is Pinocchio's many moral misadventures, and contains all his interactions with Honest John and Gideon, Stromboli, and the Coachman. This is the meat of the story, where the themes of good and evil, choices, and the consequences of our actions are laid out, culminating in the almost transformation of Pinocchio, only halted by my main man Jiminy. This contains the Blue Fairy's second appearance and intervention, that being giving Pinocchio a rare second chance, that he then almost immediately ends up blowing on Pleasure Island. This also all takes place over the course of 2 days, basically? 2.5? This movie packs so many crazy events into such a tiny time frame, especially in this zany and surprisingly dark middle portion of the film, that it ends up feeling just a bit overstuffed with incident at certain points. The most batshit crazy sequence by far has to be the Pleasure Island scene and its body horror payoff, where Pinocchio is forced to witness his friend, Lampwick, in seemingly agonizing pain, transform into a donkey before his very eyes, before almost enduring the same fate himself. This is a wild and incredibly disturbing concept to present in what is very clearly a children's film, and well effective at delivering its moralistically hand-wringing message about being a good little boy or else. I can't help but think that there are certain moments in the storyline where the Disney team was going just a little too fucking hard on the body horror vibes. Act 3, the climax, and the shortest at just over 20 minutes, is concerned with Pinocchio and Jiminy's search for Geppetto, their reunion, their thrilling escape, and Pinocchio's ultimate heroic sacrifice of himself to save his father's life from Monstro the Whale. This contains the Blue Fairy's third and final appearance and intervention, this time only in the form of her lovely voice and the slight visualization of her magic, as Pinocchio is turned from puppet to real boy. This is a gorgeous and fitting conclusion to a flawed yet lovely little film about doing the right thing and becoming the person you have the potential to be. The gorgeous voice of Evelyn Venable, in her third and final scene as the Blue Fairy, carries us home in spectacular and comforting fashion. This is quite the random, scary story, with a seriously bizarre and ungainly pace at times. While not a bad thing, boy is it a lot to take in, especially for a slightly younger audience. With passionately vivid colors, almost every frame of this film is a beautiful still to be appreciated on its own artistic merits. A little rough around the edges in terms of movement, smoothness, perspective, and proportion in some shots throughout, but nothing too egregious. This is still a captivating visual experience. Some really impressive sequences so early in their history of making films, especially the escape from Monstro at the end. A truly thrilling and nerve-wracking ending, carried out with great visual flair. The animation skill on display delivering an excellent sense of the danger and suspense of the situation. The character designs across the board are gorgeous and enduring, truly beautiful and timeless. Half of the fun of this film is just looking at it, seeing what the next bizarre fever dream the animators will give us. This is the very beginning of crack-smoking 1940s Disney, one of my favorite trends, yes. Crack-smoking 1940s Disney. The Monstro sequence especially is impressive for the water, the way that they did the water and animated and colored it and just made it so realistic and gorgeous. Like, it was talked about in the making of a documentary by all the animators, all the old school guys and the younger guys, and it really is gorgeous. It really is incredibly memorable. That water, just wow. Many people have for decades now already extolled the visual virtues of this film, so I'll keep this section as brief as I can and end it here. But there is an enormous amount on display here to enjoy with your eyes, despite some of the early creakiness of the Disney animation team still kind of getting their feet wet with this whole full-length animated feature film concept. That said, this is visual art on an extremely technically proficient and often straight-up magical level. There are some absolute banger tracks in this one, boy. When You Wish Upon a Star is not only one of the most famous songs in Disney's history, it is also probably the most important and most influential. A gorgeous ode to everything that Disney animation stands for. It was in fact the first ever Disney tune to win the Oscar for Best Original Song, something that has happened many, many, many times since. It plays at the beginning of basically every Disney film, and it's a melody that we all know and love, and that signifies that we are probably in for a magical hour and a half of animated storytelling. When You Wish Upon a Star is up there alongside Steamboat Willie's whistled melody as one of the most iconic and enduring sounds in Disney animation's long history. Don Hahn called it the equivalent of Somewhere Over the Rainbow for Disney. Give a Little Whistle is an awesome little bop and sung super well by my boy Jiminy. What a star. An Actor's Life for me is a spoodly little number that I always dance along to in my chair when I watch this film. Take that for what you will. All of the songs sung during the Stromboli sequence, I think it's just I've Got No Strings, but there's a section sung by other puppets anyway, either by Pinocchio or the other puppets, have always kind of grated on my ears. I get why people like them, but I think they're weak compared to the rest of the soundtrack. This film is a cornerstone of the brand that is Disney animation as a whole, in many ways, from its story and themes, to its iconography, to the song When You Wish Upon a Star, to Jiminy Cricket himself, as such an enduring, celebrated, and reused character in the Disney canon, to the several tiny but memorable cameos in other animated classics made by Pinocchio himself, such as in Aladdin and Tangled. So much of this film just is Disney animation, and no matter how you may feel about the film itself, its massive importance to the wider Disney brand is undeniable. This, coupled with the Blue Fairy being Disney's first of many important fairies, make Pinocchio a hugely pivotal film in terms of how all magic works within the greater Disney animation universe. Something that we'll also see laid out very clearly next week in the next film on our list. As I've already touched on, This film introduced the concept of a wishing star to the Disney universe, something that has been returned to by the animation house many, many times over the years, such as in films like Princess and the Frog or the just-released Wish. Almost every element of this film has found new life in some form or another over the years, and Pinocchio remains, as ever, a core part of the identity of Disney animation itself. And now it's time for the Critics Roundup, where I look at the collective as well as the individual thoughts of this week, 25 different critics from YouTube and online. And as I said earlier in this review, this D.E.A.R, documentary, essay, and review, there are a few that put it top number one, quite a few that put it number one, and it's mostly the online critics. The YouTube critics were much harsher on it. The YouTube critics kind of, I thought it was a bit mid, I thought it was a bit mid, and the online critics absolutely loved it. They absolutely went crazy for this one. So the film nerds really like this one, and the YouTube critics, the younger people, think it's a little bit overrated, and I tend to agree with them. But you'll see at the end in my final thoughts and themes. So there you go. Anyway, without further ado, LS Mark 26 loves the animation and likes the episodic story, likes all the characters, and loved how dark it is. Schaeferless Productions, 37th, says it's one of the weirdest Disney movies ever. Weird. I have to stop doing that in every review. I love you, Rachel. I'm sorry. Too disjointed and episodic calls. Sean Chandler, 35th, says it's classic and is a complete story, but feels creepy and weird. And he doesn't enjoy it that much. The Trove, 15th, calls the plot bizarre but says it has a lot of magic and charm, that the animation is amazing, and that the nostalgia really helps it out. Loves Figaro. I agree. I also, did I put the note? I know, I talked about Cleo, yeah. Dave Lee Down Under, 3rd, calls it Walt's most epic film, a perfect piece of art, displaying incredible traditional animation, says it is heartwarming and emotional. Brian Hall, 8th, says he forgets how much he loves it until he watches it again. A tier. Modern Mouse, 5th, calls it one of the best movies of all time. Says the animation is top tier. Justin watches movies. 1st, says it's his favorite Disney movie. Loves the characters, themes, story, and especially the journey of Pinocchio. The 90s Kid, 32nd to 40th. The Glad and Gladiator, 45th, calls it the best Golden Era film. Wow. Okay. Loves the story and pace. He really didn't like the Golden Era films, The Glad and Gladiator. Jeez Louise. They were all in the low 40s for him. Chris Itua, 5th, says it showcases early Disney at its best, calls it well-crafted, messed up, and terrifying. Maple Street Movies, 3rd. The Movie Geek, 21st, says it's dated but important to see. And now on to the online critics. Collider, 1st, calls it the most beautiful Disney movie and the alpha and omega of Disney, whatever that means. Unshaved Mouse. That'll never not make me chuckle. 7th, calls it Walt Disney's crowning achievement as an animator. BuzzFeed, 22nd, says it's a classic, but that there are better. Cinema Blend, 4th, says Jiminy is like the genie. Says it still holds up and impresses to this day. Paste Magazine, 1st, says Disney's second feature set a bar for artistry and storytelling that animators have been chasing ever since. Slash Film, 1st, says there are few films as haunting, as heartfelt, and as thrilling as Pinocchio. Hollywood.com, 20th, calls it super duper weird. Screen Rant, 25th, says only Del Toro's recent film rivals it for animated Pinocchio. So, Rachel, it's because you're just so funny. You're a very funny woman. The Playlist, 3rd, says it's a head trip masterpiece. Noah Fryman, 1st, says it's one of his favorite movies ever and a perfect story. Darth Docking on Reddit, 53rd. What Culture, 24th, says Pinocchio is easy to root for, but some other characters aren't as great. 12 out of the 25 ranked it in the top 10, and 5 of them ranked it their number 1 overall out of all Disney classics. Average ranking was 16.08, which is interestingly low. Last week we had Snow White come in at 9.9th, and this one comes in at 16th. But this one had 5 number 1 placings, which I think was more than Snow White. And I know that Sleeping Beauty is about 16th, like average as well ranked, and it has like 0 number 1s, I think. We'll get to that one eventually. But yeah, it was a bit low. People were mixed on it. Like YouTube critics thought it was a bit, okay. And the online ones were all about it, so ready boy. Ultimately, this is a film all about morality, about goodness and badness, about making those right choices, and about living a good life a day at a time, with discipline and maturity, as we grow older and wiser. This makes the failures of this film, especially the racism featured in it, especially glaring and comically unforgivable, as this film itself takes such an obsessive moral high ground and bases its entire ethos around doing the right thing. Yet it is still perfectly happy to willfully and brazenly propagate racist stereotypes and ideas, furthering hateful attitudes for children to then see and absorb. In a film as enjoyable as this one mostly is, that is one massive black eye of hypocrisy and frankly useless intolerance and hate. I know it was 1940, but come the fuck on, dude. It is also not at all lost on me that the lackeys of the sinister coachman are large, hairy, seemingly ape-like creatures that are colored all in black, with evil, glowing green eyes. Gee, Disney. I wonder what kind of people those visually dark, mindless, seemingly enslaved grunt characters are coded to represent. Just fucking unbelievable. And the racism of this film is not usually mentioned alongside other infamously racially insensitive productions like Dumbo or Peter Pan. Yet Pinocchio is in some ways even more fraught with these particular types of hypocritical and harmful depictions. This film, and this story, is the ultimate coming-of-age metaphor. A thrilling, disturbing, and utterly bizarre meditation on the nature of growing up, gaining wisdom, and seeing the world for what it is, rather than for how it appears. While not always successful, and frequently over the top in some of its more garish moralizing, this is a story and a film with a great deal on its mind, and a clear message for all the little girls and especially the little boys about always doing the right thing. While imperfectly conveyed, this is obviously a worthwhile sentiment. At the end of the day, as sweet, impressively animated, and nostalgically enchanting as this film so often is, I cannot give it a pass for its unforgivably rampant usage of troublingly racist depictions and messages, as well as some other flaws of execution. As such, I awarded a heavily flawed, yet enjoyable 8 out of 10. Take that, little wooden boy, and be happy. And that's it. Next week, we'll be back and discussing also 1940s Fantasia, so please join me again for that one. Thank you so very much for watching, and if you're still here, good night, good luck, and enjoy the afterword.
Went down Johnson Street, by mechanic come passing by. Going on down that Johnson Street, make trouble in that life. Wouldn't he bad? Tell you, wouldn't he bad? Bobby said to Margaret, come to me, I said. If you don't come in a hurry, I put a 38 through your head. Wouldn't he bad? Tell you, wouldn't he bad? Bobby said to Ben Press, I'm bound to take your life. You cause trouble between me and my wife. Wouldn't he bad? Tell you, wouldn't he bad? Bobby said to the high chef, do you think I'm going to run? If I had another load, me you have some fun. Wouldn't he bad? Hey, make me one pallet on. A mad pallet on your floor. Won't you make it so your man never know? Yeah, make it so your man never know. Hey, make it so your man never know. A mad pallet on you. Won't you make it so your man never know? Yes, I'm looking for that bullet, lay me down. Hey, I'm looking for that bullet, lay me down. I'm looking for that bullet gave me. Yes, I'm looking for that bullet, laid me down. Yeah, looking for that bullet, lay me down. Yeah, I'm looking for the bullet, lay me down. I'm looking for that bullet gave me found. I'm looking for that bullet, lay me down.
That's all.